بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق أجمعين سيدنا محمد عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم وبعد. Last time we finished the introduction to fiqh or to Islamic law, and we concluded with some different questions about the madahib, about the schools of thought and the taqleed and ijtihad and these concepts. Today inshallah we should be talking about Usul al-Fiqh, the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, the ways of fiqh, basically turuq al-fiqh as they used to call it, the ways we use to get the rulings that we find in the ilm of fiqh. And today might be a little bit more difficult than the fiqh lecture because it's more about some theories and methodologies the scholars used to deduce these ahkam, so we need inshallah to have some discussions about these different schools and ways of thinking inshallah. We talked about the why the four madhabs last time. We need just to connect this point with the new slides today inshallah. And we answered these multiple questions at the end about, do I have to follow a madhab or not? And how do I choose my madhab? And which one is the best and the most correct? What if the imam of the madhab does a mistake if I'm following one of these madhab? And can I change my madhab if I'm a follower of a certain madhab of these four? And can I combine between two or more madhab? If I'm following one madhab, or I'm not actually following a madhab, I'm following whatever sound, authentic opinion that I can find, and I want to combine or to come up with a mix basically between two opinions to make it easier for myself to follow or to practice. And then the confusion with differences. That usually when you ask for fatwa, or you ask multiple people, or like you Google, if that's a good source of information, and you come up with multiple fatwas and verdicts on the things that you're asking for, that's a source of confusion. And then what we call it the fatwa shopping, or which is the wrong way of getting an answer for any shari'i question that you have in your life. And then the ijtihad and taqleed, which is basically part of Usul al-Fiqh. We're going to talk about them in detail inshallah. The levels of qualified scholars, that starts from the common Muslim, which is the average person who follows the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the way to the independent mujtahid, and we'll talk about this in detail today inshallah. Do you still have any questions about the madahib or the schools of thought or the following and the taqleed and these things? Any thoughts that got developed since last week until today? So everybody's on board, we're all good for the madahib and there's no problem? Because it's related to today's lecture. When we talk about the turuq, the ways, the methodologies of understanding the evidences and the sources of Islam, it's based on your understanding of the concept of schools of thought. The concept of, do I need to follow one of these madahib or not? So that's why I went through these questions again, and then we'll talk about them in detail inshallah again when we talk about Usul al-Fiqh. Okay, so introduction to the principles of Islamic jurisprudence or the Islamic legal theory in general. Okay, so the points we need to cover is the 10 introductory foundations of Usul al-Fiqh. Again, we're going to have these 10 introductory principles or foundations for every single science we're going to talk about, inshallah. We talked about the theory of Al-Mabadi al-Ashara, the 10 principles, the 10 foundations. You need to know these 10 foundations for every ilm you're going to learn, inshallah. The sources of Islamic law, the authentic sources of fiqh, the rules of deduction, some examples of the way scholars would deduce these ahkam from the sources. Then again, the concept of ijtihad, the scholarly legal reasoning, and the taqleed, or the imitation, the literal meaning of taqleed, following someone in his opinion. Okay, so before talking about Usul al-Fiqh, there's a couple important points that we need to highlight. Number one, we had a huge tradition in our history. A lot of contributions. We had thousands, maybe millions of books and researches that were made on the Islamic legal theory and about fiqh, the Islamic law, and about aqeedah and theology. We have a huge tradition. But have you ever thought about how much of this tradition was published? Like, what is the percentage of this tradition that is accessible to us today? Can you just guess a number? 25? Okay. What do you imagine? It's a big percentage, or it's like just a little percentage? Small percentage. Why? Why it's small? Why do you assume that it's a smaller percentage?
Because it's a lot of effort and work required to document and clearly write.
They already did. The authors, they already wrote books and they documented them in whatever written form that was available for them at the time. But we lost some of that. So how much we got and how much we lost? Yeah.
I don't know how much we got, but I know that throughout history we've lost a lot. Like for example, when Baghdad was overtaken by the Sultan, they ran and aimed the books to the rivers. Also, there was a lot of tradition in some scholars that when it came to their death times, they would ask their students to burn their books. So there was some scholars who did that because if there was any mistake, they didn't want to carry that mistake with them.
Yes. There's actually two different reasons that happened really in history. And the first one was really big. The wars and the political problems that happened that caused the loss of a lot of traditions, that was one of the biggest reasons.
And I think that the third one, which is probably the most crucial one, is because it was a very poor environment overall for people who seek knowledge, and most of the knowledge was transferred through just talking, just through memorization, then documenting.
Okay.
There were no mass reproduction books and stuff, so it has taken individual effort to reprint or rewrite the books to kind of spread them to people. So it's not like you had 100 copies of the one book and then you lost some. There was maybe one or two books, and if you lost one, that's it, you lost it.
Yeah, but that's true. That's one reason too. But he passed a lot of manuscripts, right? We have a huge number of manuscripts that are still available until today. So if you want to make the same comparison between the manuscripts that we have nowadays and all over the world and the books that have been already published, which is a bigger percentage? Do we still have much more books that were not published, more than the books that are already published? So some people try to study this point and to see, okay, how much of our tradition was already published? The number they came up with, I'm not 100% sure about the accuracy, but that's really expressive about the reality. They said what was published of the tradition is only 9%. Only 9% of our tradition that was published. 9%, yeah. That's it. Of this, not the tradition of fiqh, tradition in general, like any traditional like heritage that we had from our scholars. If this number is accurate, like what does it tell you? You are a person who wants to seek knowledge, and you know that, and you are, let's say you want to seek traditional knowledge, okay? You're a person who wants to connect and to just fill the gap between the modern time and the tradition or the history of Muslims, and you want to connect this gap, right? So what does this tell you?
Because you can only learn so much from books.
You can what?
You can only learn so much from books. You have to spend time with people of knowledge or learn, shield from this and that.
Okay, so you need interactive experience with ilm more than only the books. Okay.
I would say that we're already overwhelmed with what's available. So knowing that there's lots more that was published is mashallah, our culture traditions are very rich that we don't have access to all of it. And whatever we see, we still feel it's too much for us now. And then mashallah, there's a lot more that we don't know about.
Okay, so that's true. There's a lot that we can't actually comprehend, right? If you want to go over every single thing that was printed, that needs a lifelong time, right? So again, what is the message out of this? That means it's not only about books, right? So what is it about? What do we need as a main element of the process of ilm? And the books are so important. Resources are so important for sure. References are so important for sure. But there is something else that has to complement this, or has to go hand in hand with the written form of ilm that stores all this information.
Practice?
Practice?
Linguistic.
What do you mean by linguistic?
Like to know Arabic, to understand, to comprehend proper Arabic writing, so that you don't misinterpret or misunderstand.
Yeah, but that's a way to understand these books, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but that's again related to the books themselves. But I'm saying, is there something that is beyond these books already?
The foundations, the tools.
The foundations?
The tools, yeah, that were established by the scholars, the mujtahideen, beforehand.
Okay.
A teacher?
Teacher.
The tradition or the context in which
The what, sorry?
the context or the tradition
Mm-hmm.
in which the books can be taken.
Okay, so basically, I think all the answers are correct. It's basically about not how dense the amount of information you have. It's about actually the skill of your intellect that is able actually to develop this information and to build on this information and to make this information all the time relevant and applicable. So it's about they used to call it the malaka, the intellect. There's a sort of intellectual skill that you need. We talked about this when we talked about the intellectual capacity that Imam Shafi'i mentioned in the first class, right? When you develop an intellectual skill and you are reading or studying these books or parts of these books, right? For example, if you want to study fiqh, the ilm of fiqh, right? The scholars will tell you need to study, let's say 10 levels until you become a faqih. Just assuming that number. And in each level you say, okay, you need to study 2 books in each level. That means 20 books, right? 20 books compared to like 1 million books that have already been published. You don't need to read all these books to be a faqih. But the fact that you can go through these 20 books, I'm just giving numbers as examples. You're going through these 20 books with a teacher who will actually teach you not only what is in the book, but how to deal with this book. And now throughout this process of teaching these books, you would actually develop this intellect, this malaka, that would make you develop this ilm, and you make it relevant, and you make it applicable, and you can build on it, that you can actually be able to write a book. They would build an accumulative effort of these books, and you can actually produce something new. Right? So it's about this mahara, it's an intellectual skill that you need to have to develop on these things. Usul al-Fiqh is about this. It's one of the best, they used to say it's one of the best civilizational sciences that Muslims contributed to this life, or to the world in general. The teacher used to tell us, al-ilmu san'a. Knowledge is literally a craft. You know when a craft person who's like really skilled in something, he's a carpenter, for example, and he's so skilled he can make very beautiful shapes of things, right? It's the same thing. It's not about the amount of information you have. Amount of information is so important for sure. You can quantify ilm sometimes, but that's not the only qualification that you need to get. You need to get other things, which is the skills that you would actually apply to this amount of information that you have. This is what Muslims contributed to the whole world through this ilm, the science of Usul al-Fiqh. When the modern mind, as they call it, al-aql al-hadith, when they established in the modern time, and after what they call it, the scientific revolution, and they established a new methodology of science, they said that the whole approach that they have is based on 4 main steps, right? Number 1, you actually you make observation of the phenomena, right? And then you make an analysis for the phenomenon, and then you predict what is going to happen after this phenomenon, and then you control the phenomenon. This is the 4 things that the modern scientific theory is based on. Observation, and then analysis, then prediction, and then control. Basically, like generally, science revolves around these things. But when we approach this as Muslims, we see that's fantastic. That's something that is really good. But can we apply the same methodology on a divine text? Can we apply the same methodology on understanding the purpose of life through the lens of a divine book that is called the Quran, for example? You get the point? This al-ilm al-hadith, of the modern scientific mind or methodology, does it apply to understanding any divine text like Quran or Sunnah, for example, through the observation, analysis, prediction, and control? So we could understand that, okay, that's fabulous that you have this scientific theory, but it doesn't deal with every single aspect that we have in our life. It's not all about, we talked about this before, it's not all about the science. It's not all about what you can physically deal with as an empirical evidence or proof that you have. There's something beyond this that you need really to deal with. We have another world actually. We call it alam al-ghayb, the world of the unseen. That is the centric part of it is al-wahy, is the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sorry, just 1 second. Okay, so when we say that the centric point of this manhaj or Islamic methodology is the wahi, we understand that the wahi is not only a literal book that you need to take the letters and the sentences the way they are and you just like apply them literally to your life. There is something also beyond and behind these letters and words. Wahi is not something harfi, it's not something literal that you just, it's not just like a math equations that you build them and you will get answers for your life problems. There's something that unveils and uncovers what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to know and to do in this life. It's a message of guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's wahi li hidayat nas. Our job in this life is to understand and to uncover the purposes of this revelation. Allah sent you a book and He wants you to understand what is in this book. Not every single thing in this book is clear to you. So you need to know how to understand it. And when you go again to that modern scientific methodology, it cannot deal with this realm of the divine text. It deals with other areas that we highly respect and appreciate and they are so important. But now we want another methodology other than this scientific empirical one to understand the divine text and the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we define the Quran, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can offer multiple definitions. And one of these main definitions is that the Quran is a summary of like a human guidance, as they call it. Khulasatul hidayat al-bashariyah. It's a summary of all kinds of guidance that would happen to human beings. This is the way at least we Muslims believe in it. Okay, when we open the book of Allah, when we open the Quran, what do you find in the Quran? What do you think of themes to be in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yeah, I'm assuming we read Quran, right? Alhamdulillah. Yeah, sometimes we read Quran. So stories, okay, stories.
The rules,
Ahkam, rulings. Mm-hmm.
Future.
Okay, some incidents that would happen in the future. The Quran would predict something that would happen in the future. That's right. Lessons of what?
Like lessons from the past.
From the past, like stories of people, nations before us, and there are lessons that we can learn from this. What else? Jannah. Jannah and Jahannam. So it tells us about the unseen world and about the hereafter.
God telling us about Himself. Allah telling us about Himself.
Allah telling us about Himself. Aqidah issues. Same thing. Al-Akhirah, the hereafter. Guidance for what? Okay, yeah. Does it talk to us about the human being?
Yes.
Does it talk to us about different states of psychological things that happen to the human being? This is part of things in the Quran. Does it talk to us about some things social?
Yes.
Can we see the Quran has some points of sociology? Yes.
How we can create from the beginning.
How can what?
It talks about how we can create it from the beginning.
How we were created.
In the womb.
Yes, how we were created in the beginning. It talks about some political issues, right? Does that exist in the Quran? So all these things are themes, right? General multiple themes that exist in the Quran. If you have this background about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can understand more what is the job of Usul al-Fiqh. Right? Because the Quran is not only a source of rulings, it's not only a source of legal rulings that you have to abide by. It's a source of a lot of other things. You already mentioned like 10, 12 things. And there are a lot more that you can find in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep this very comprehensive general idea about Quran in your mind, and then you understand more what is Usul al-Fiqh about. So إن مبادئ كل فن 10, the 10 foundations that we talk about them for every ilm, these 10 ones, and you know them already. So when we say Usul al-Fiqh, that's the term in Arabic, which is literally the basis of law. Usul al-Fiqh, right? If you have any compounded sentence in Arabic language, you need to break it down to the words and then you define every word by itself to understand more what does the term mean. So you have Usul al-Fiqh, it's one word. It becomes a alam, it becomes a noun for one thing, right? But if you break it down, it's two words. Usul and al-Fiqh. And if you break it down more, Usul is a plural word. It's the plural of asl, principles and principle. So you need to define principle, is al-asl, right? And you say the basis, or the base is the thing upon which another thing is built, right? Like if there are pillars for this building, that's the usul, that's the principles of this building. That's the linguistic meaning of the word al-asl, or principles. Al-Fiqh, we defined it already in the last lecture, which is knowing the legal rulings which are reached through ijtihad, the qualified reasoning. And we're going to talk about the ijtihad more. This is the linguistic meaning of these two words, of usul al-fiqh. Okay, if you want to define or to offer a technical definition of usul al-fiqh, usul al-fiqh basically covers these three main aspects, right? It's number one, the knowledge of the general evidences of Islamic law. Islamic law is the fiqh. This is just the term that we're going to use. And then the manners in which they are used for inference. It's number two. Now, this is the three parts are all the same definition. We just broke them down into three sentences. And number three, the characteristics of the one who applies or uses them for inference, which is the mujtahid. معرفة دلائل الفقه وكيفية الاستفادة بها وحال المستفيد. This is what they call it in Arabic. You know, what are the evidences of fiqh and how do you apply them, and who is the person who is qualified to apply them. Those are the three parts of the definition of usul al-fiqh. All usul al-fiqh are about these three things. And we call them general evidences for a reason, because we will talk about them now when we differentiate between usul al-fiqh and the fiqh. So keep these 3 points in mind, and we're going to explain each one of them by itself. So the first one, the general evidences of Islamic law. And again, keep the word general in your mind. What are the sources of legislation that we can extract these rulings from? Right? Last time we talked about there's the Quran, it's a source, right? There is the Sunnah, it's a source. There is the Ijma', is a source. The Qiyas, the analogy, is a source. All these things are sources of legislation. And when we look into them, we find a lot of things that we can deduce rulings through. So you found something called Al-Amr, the command. Right? What is the meaning of the command from Allah? So you find commands in the Quran, and you find commands in the Sunnah. You find prohibitions in the Quran, which is the opposite, and you find prohibitions in the Sunnah. So what does it mean? When I find do or don't in the Quran or in the Sunnah, how can I understand it? When I find do in the Quran, what is the default implication of the word if'al, do? And what is the default implication of the word don't? This is usul al-fiqh. When Allah says establish prayer, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, that's an order, right? That's a command from Allah. What does it imply? Does it imply that we have to establish prayer, or we are recommended to establish prayer, or we are permitted to establish prayer, or something else? Why do we have to? How do you get this implication from a linguistic command, a linguistic definitive of that verb? When he says, Kulu washrabu, eat and drink, what does it imply? That we have to eat and drink? Maybe, right? Maybe we have to eat and drink. Or another question, is it at the same level? So establish prayer, the same level as a command like eat and drink? Are they the same level? Why?
Came like that, is eat and drink, or there is something behind eat and drink and don't.
كلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا.
ولا تسرفوا.
Okay.
Well, I think the command here is not do not تسرفوا, not تسرفوا.
It's not كلوا واشربوا.
It's كلوا واشربوا, which is natural.
Mm-hmm.
I created you, I know you needed to eat and drink. But the question is, do not go beyond or do extravagant,
No, but
at an extravagant, so whatever.
Yeah, but literally we have here 2 orders and 1 prohibition. Eat, number 1. Drink, number 2. Do not be excessive when you eat and drink, number 3. Right? So these 3 things, 2 commands and 1 prohibition. Literally. So do you mean that the first 2 orders or commands, they're not literal? They're like an introduction to the prohibition?
It's an
Okay, how do we interpret this? What gave us this interpretation against no? أقيموا الصلاة is a must. We didn't say like, okay, أقيموا الصلاة because he said إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر. So he said the prayers would actually forbid you from evil. So that was just an introduction to the prohibition of evil, for example. It's not actually that the prayer is meant by itself. You get what I'm saying? So I agree with you, but the point that I'm trying to make is there are differences between these orders and commands. Right? How can we know the difference between these commands in the Quran? Through this signs. When we have this order of established prayer in the Quran. Then the Prophet ﷺ says, pray as you see me pray. right?
Yes.
Pray as you see me pray. صلوا كما رأيتموني أصلي. That's a command in the Sunnah. Is this command in the same level like established prayer?
No.
Why?
Pray as you see me pray. This is just to show you how you perform the prayer.
And established prayer?
Established prayer, that means connect with me. The way you connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through the prayer.
No, but you're talking about the meaning of the command. I'm talking about the level of the command itself as being for obligation or recommendation or something else. So both are interpreted to be obligatory upon us to pray, and then to pray the way the Prophet prayed.
They're complementary. They don't contradict. They say the same thing, so they'll make them both strong.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about contradiction. I'm talking about the level of these two commands to be for obligation, to be for recommendation, or something else.
Yeah, it's the same.
Right? So you need to examine these things through the language first, and then you understand them in the Quran. Through the language tells you that when you have a command in Arabic language, when you have an amr, right, a definitive verb that tells you do something, it has to be whether for obligation or a recommendation or ibaha, just you are permitted to do this. Right? These are the three main meanings, three main implications of commands. And then when you examine and search in the Quran and you explore all the commands in the Quran, you would come up with a methodology that would tell you how would you approach these different commands in the Quran. Right?
Right.
These are the three main meanings or implications of commands, right? Can you get commanded with something that it's impossible to happen? Okay. Now, like your son wants to leave the house, and you're telling him you're not allowed to leave the house, and he's just challenging you, and he's so stubborn. No, I'm gonna leave. So you want to, like, kind of threatening him that you're not allowed to leave. So you tell him like, you leave if you want, right? Or you leave if you can. What do you mean by this order? Are you ordering him to leave the house, or you're just threatening him that there will be bad consequences if you leave? It's a threat. So when Allah is talking about to the unbelievers in the Quran, and He's threatening them, and then He's telling them, "اعملوا ما شئتم, إنه بما تعملون بصير." Do whatever you want. He knows everything you're doing. This command is that He's telling them, yes, do whatever you want, literally, or He means something else. It's a threat, right? Okay, when He talked to some people who used to deny the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, and then He told them, قُلْ كُونُوا حِجَارَةً أَوْ حَدِيدًا. He told them, be a rock or iron. What does He mean by this? Can they just transform themselves to rock or iron? So what is the implication of this order? And it's linguistically, that's a command. That's an order, that's an amr, fi'l amr.
Means be strong in your belief.
What?
Be strong in your belief, like unmovable.
Yeah, but in this context of this verse specifically, it was actually like criticizing them for not following the belief. So He's telling them like, be whatever you want, you'd be returning back to us. They were denying Him. So you tell them like, whatever shape and substance you are made of, basically, you're going to be returning back to us. أو خلقا مما يكبر في صدوركم فسيقولون من يعيدنا. They would say, who is going to return us back to life? قل الذي فطركم أول مرة. The one who created you the first time is able to return you back to life. So this amr is not literal, right? It's a figurative amr. It's a figurative command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you can go on with this series. You can get 10 implications of a command. Again, starting from a command to be for obligation, for recommendation, for permission, for threat, for giving you both options, they're okay. You can stay or you can leave. You give a person two different options. There are a lot of different implications of command. But when we examine all this through Usul Al-Fiqh, we said, okay, the commands that are related to the actions of the subjects or the mukallafin, the default implication is wujub, is obligation. Any order or command in the Quran, when it comes, that means it's for obligation. Until you find another dalil or evidence that would tell you no. There is another evidence that would tell you, you know what, that's not for obligation, it's for something else. So وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا, that means it's wajib. No. Why? Because the logic says, it doesn't mean that you have to eat and drink every single time. You just allowed to eat and drink. So this amr, this command of eat and drink, is to permit you to eat and drink. Not just to permit you, and to show you that He's the one who bestows all these blessings upon you. So when you eat and drink, you need to think of me. That's one of the meanings. Same thing in the Sunnah. when a command comes from the Prophet ﷺ, the default implication is that it's for obligation. Until he tells us in another hadith, or he does something, he practices something that would tell us, okay, that's actually okay to skip sometimes, so it's not actually for obligation. The same thing you say about the prohibitions. When Allah says in the Quran, do not transgress. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. That's a very general prohibition that tells you transgression is haram. How did we add the word haram to the sentence? Because the default implication is that if there is a don't in the Quran, a nahi in the Quran, something that is telling you cannot do this, it implies prohibition. Unless you have another evidence that would tell you, no, it's okay, you can actually do this. So there is no evidence in Islam that would tell you transgression is okay. That means the verse, do not transgress, means it's a prohibited. Is it that difficult to get? Yeah, it is. Did they spend all the time exploring all these things? Yes, they did. They did 100%. And they did go all over these things. They examined all these orders and permissions. We're not saying this out of exaggeration. No, they did all this homework before. And that's why they classified all these different categories. When he said in the Sunnah, do not hate one another. وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا. That's a command. And then we explore the rest of the Sunnah. Are there cases that you can hate someone? If it doesn't exist, so yeah, it's haram to hate someone. Right? It's haram to actually hate any person. Because he said, do not hate one another. Right? Is there any case that you can't hate a person for a legitimate reason? That's not really a serious question, but I just wanted to get some coffee. So. Can you hate a person if you want to hate a person? Yes?
Somebody who is an enemy of Allah and His Messenger, and he's a public enemy.
Okay. Public enemy?
Of the, yeah, like he publicly is an enemy of Allah and His Messenger.
Okay. So you're allowed to hate him?
I'm saying personally, yes.
Personally, yes. Okay.
Hate's an emotion, right? So you can hate someone as long as you don't act upon it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't choose, you like, even the Prophet ﷺ, like, people who hurt his uncle, like when he saw Wahshi, he says, even after he was Islam, he told him, like, even though you're a Muslim, can you just go away from my face? Because he reminded him of something sad, and he reminded him of his uncle. So hate is an emotion you can have, but as long as you don't act upon it or transgress it.
So we're not responsible for our emotions?
It's
Not
not
all of
in
our
our hands.
emotions, not.
What?
Your emotions are not in your hands.
Even
the
I saw
Prophet
that
ﷺ
right?
Sorry, you're saying something?
Even the Prophet asked not to be judged by something he can't control, whether it was his heart.
So generally, we're not responsible for our emotions, right?
You can't control.
Okay, but don't we sometimes take the means that would lead us to a certain emotion?
What is it?
Sometimes we take the means and the ways that we know that is going to end up falling in these emotions. So if that happens, that means we are responsible for these emotions that would be the consequence of these means that we took at the beginning. I didn't mean to talk about this. That was just the coffee. You had a question?
Yeah, just
Sorry about it.
I think we're responsible for our emotions. Like the Prophet saw some different cases. He said like, "Innama al-hilm bil-tahalum," like being patient, it's like practicing being patient. Another thing is that like becoming angry also. You're sitting like to stand like different teachings. You show the stuff to show out. So basically.
So in these situations, he was talking about the emotion itself or the way we act on the emotions?
Feelings and all. You get the feeling and then you react.
What is the difference between feelings and emotions?
Feeling and emotion.
I don't know. I'm just asking.
It's basically like, I think they're the same thing. Like you feel, and you have the emotion of this thing, and then you act.
Emotions are the same.
Okay.
When the Prophet asked him, who do you love? He said that he loved himself more than anything else. And the Prophet asked him to reconsider it until he said that I love the Prophet more than myself. So he was able to change his emotion. And I think generally we do control our emotions too.
So the question was not about controlling the emotions. It was about the responsibility for the emotions. But you're saying if we have control, so we're responsible? Yeah, but that was a faith issue. Because his iman will not be full without loving the Prophet.
Allah says in the Quran,
Ahub here doesn't mean the emotional love. It means like the your will of doing something, your willingness of doing something, or your wanting something. Okay, I'm just the devil advocate. I'm just not holding the other opinion. Yes.
Isn't there a story of when the wives of the Prophet ﷺ sent Fatima to the Prophet ﷺ because they knew that he loved Aisha more than them? I don't know the full story, but I know like he told his daughter at the end of it, he's like, I can't control what's like who I like love and who I don't love. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When asked about Aisha, he said, I was given or blessed her love. So it indicates that it's a feeling or an emotion that was given as a rizq.
Okay, so let's back to the prohibitions. Ahsan. Yeah, it's this is related to the intentions. That's something related to what you intend before doing something. Yeah.
So is it okay to hit someone you hate?
To what?
To hit someone you hate?
To hate someone?
Hit someone.
Hit someone I hate? Oh no. Okay, so I think we agree that acting on the emotions, no. But the question was about the emotions themselves. Again, unless if he deserves to be hit, that's different. But in general, no. Okay. So these are examples for the commands in the Quran and the Sunnah, examples for the prohibitions in the Quran and Sunnah. And number 3, the consensus. The ijma'. Ijma' is a source of ahkam, of rulings in Islam. Ijma' actually generally, that's by itself one of the big chapters or topics of Usul Al-Fiqh. But ijma' generally is based on, in the biggest part of it, on the Quran and the Sunnah too. We talked about this last time. We touched on the ijma' in a quick way. We said consensus is based on a general evidence in the Quran or general evidence in the Sunnah for the biggest part. And then we ask the question, okay, so what is the point of having ijma' if we have the Quran and the Sunnah? Sometimes ijma' would add more details to the principle that is in the Quran or the principle that is in the Sunnah. So that's the point of ijma'. Number 2, the ijma' would actually raise the level of accuracy of this ruling from being 80, 90% to 100%. Because if there is a consensus, you cannot go against it. There are a lot of other benefits for ijma' too. But sometimes ijma' would be based on a maslahah and a public benefit or interest for people or for communities. That's why the example I mentioned here was one of these examples. I didn't mention an example of ijma' of something in the Quran or the Sunnah already. Like there is ijma' that salah are 5. You say, okay, what is the point? We have that in the Sunnah. No, but when there is consensus that prayers are 5 times, that means if you say or you believe or you practice them 6, that's a huge problem with your faith, not only with your fiqh. Because consensus actually block the way of going against this opinion. But on purpose, I chose this example of the collection of the Quran during the time of the Sahaba. They all agreed on this issue. Because they said, we have to collect the Quran, otherwise we're going to lose it. So that was a maslahah. That was for the public benefit of Muslims. That now the Huffaz are dying. So the idea started during the time of Abu Bakr, and then it got developed a little bit during the time of Umar, and the final process was during the time of Uthman ibn Affan. So when they started it, some Sahaba, they had some discussions like, why would we do this? Like Abu Bakr himself was against it at the beginning. And then he was convinced after some consultations with other Sahaba, and they said, okay, we need to go ahead and do it. So it was a consensus among the scholars. There's no ayah in the Quran that says you need to collect the Quran. And there's no hadith that says this too. So this ijma', it is an ijma'. The Sahaba all agreed on this, but it was actually a consensus based on the maslahah, which is, we call it the public interest or the public benefit for all Muslims. Analogy, we talked about it last time too. You make an analogical reasoning to come to the same conclusion of the hukum. We talked about khamr, for example, which is not about the substance of the khamr, of the alcohol, it's about all substances and liquids that have actually the same like level of intoxication of the khamr. It doesn't have to be a liquid, by the way, a liquid or any other substance. Those are the 4 main sources of ahkam. And we have a lot of other sources of ahkam too. I just gave one more example, one extra example. We call it the presumption of continuity. It's istishabul hal. And that's very important and has a lot of applications in fiqh. And one of the very famous examples for this, when you had wudu before, you're sure you had wudu, but you're not sure if you broke your wudu or not. Right? You're sure that you had wudu for Maghrib, but you're not sure at the time of Isha. do I still have wudu or not? What do you do in this case?
Goes as if you have wudu.
What? Can you just pray, or you need to make wudu again?
Yes, you can pray.
You can pray?
If you're not sure you make wudu or not, what do you do?
No. So the question is, the scenario is, I'm sure I had wudu, but I'm not sure if I broke it.
You continue praying.
Can I just keep, yeah, like, can I pray?
According to which madhab?
Any madhab. Any madhab.
If you're debating whether you made wudu or not, you make wudu.
That's another scenario.
If you're debating whether you had wudu or not, you base it as if you had wudu.
I didn't get the second.
I'm sorry.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you broke your wudu or not, you base it that you didn't break it.
Okay, so there are some disagreements among some of that, but the famous answer is that you can still pray. Why? They based it on this, istishabul hal, the presumption of continuity. Because presuming the continuity of the ritual purity, for one who doubts it's a continuation. You're sure that you had wudu, but you're not sure if you broke it. So what is the thing that I'm sure about? You go for it. That's why if it's the opposite, you're sure that you broke your wudu, but you're not sure if you made wudu or not, you cannot pray, you have to make wudu. Why? Because istishabul hal. You just go with the thing that you are sure about. In the salah, during the prayer, you forgot or you got heedless for a while, and then you're not sure this is my third rak'ah or fourth rak'ah. So what do you do? No, what do you do first with the number of rak'ahs?
You assume you pray 3 and you pray the 4th. So you assume.
So I'm not sure if this is the third or the fourth. So how should I count the rak'ahs now?
Starts from the third.
So I consider it to be the third,
Yes.
right? Why? Because this is what I'm sure about. Right? Istishabul asl, sometimes they call it this way. If it's two, if I'm in doubt, is it 2 or 3 rak'at? What? 2, yeah, same thing. Just we choose the numbers, but the same thing. So 2 or 3, 1 or 2, yeah, it doesn't matter the numbers. You just go with what you are sure about. So this is one of a lot of other actually sources of ahkam in Usul al-Fiqh. Now we got a deeper picture of the science of Usul al-Fiqh. So if you want to differentiate between fiqh and Usul al-Fiqh, can anybody explain this? What is the difference now between fiqh, Islamic law, and methodology of law, or the Islamic legal theory? Other than what is already written on the slide. Difference between fiqh and usul al-fiqh. You can rephrase this, that's fine.
So fiqh is basically assess, and usul al-fiqh is what you mark.
Sorry, say it again.
So fiqh is basically the assess,
Assess?
yeah, fiqh that we have at the time of Prophet.
Okay.
Usul al-fiqh is what was determined from the different.
So which comes first, fiqh or usul al-fiqh? Fiqh comes first? That's a good point. Which comes first, fiqh or usul al-fiqh? If fiqh comes first, so why do we need usul al-fiqh? Not comes first in history. Comes first in the mind process.
In the mind process?
Yeah.
Just thinking of the two words?
In history, you're right. In history, fiqh came first.
Yeah.
We had usul al-fiqh way later after the Prophet, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But fiqh existed since forever, since the Quran was revealed.
Yeah, usul seems an absolute thing. That's what you pick.
Okay, usul comes first in the mind, and then the applications come second, which is the fiqh. Right? For example, hypothetically, we just sat down and thought, okay, if we have a command, how are we going to deal with it? And then we said, okay, the default of commands will be the obligation. Right? And then, okay, let's go open the Quran and get all the commands in the Quran. Is this the way it is? But a counter argument would be they wouldn't figure out all these principles if they didn't look into the Quran too. Right? So there is a circularity in the process. So again, which comes first? The egg and chicken? What comes first?
And the usul fiqh is like this, it's mentioned here, it's the methods.
Okay.
That's how it's applied and according to the, for example, the ijma.
So how did we build usul al-fiqh?
How?
How did we structure the science of usul al-fiqh? Based on the fiqh?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the fiqh came first.
Yes.
So if the fiqh is there already, why do we need usul al-fiqh?
Because there's situations that came afterwards that were.
Okay. So we built it based on the things that already exist to keep the process going for the future events.
Because Islam is solid,
Okay.
How it's
Is anyone convinced that it's the opposite? Usul al-Fiqh came first? Usul al-Fiqh first? Why?
Because fiqh is the byproduct of usul al-fiqh, is how I see it.
So in the mind, if Usul came first, and then the applications come second.
I don't think one necessarily comes before the other. They're different things. Fiqh are the rules, the practical aspect. Usul fiqh is how we came to those rules, the tools.
Mhm.
So the Prophet ﷺ, he's musharra, like he gave a certain set of rules and the Sahaba followed. But eventually the Muslims had to develop their own tools in order to use the evidence that we have to make future rules. So I don't know one comes before the other, but they're different.
Okay, so the good news is we had both approaches in history. So you guys are, mashallah, scholars. So we had two big schools in history. So as we have like 4 schools of fiqh, those 4 schools of fiqh were based on 2 main schools of usul al-fiqh. You can say 70% of the scholars, they went with the concept that, no, we think hypothetically of the principles first, and then we come up with the things. I mean, in the way we author and talk about this ilm in books. So forget about what happens in the mind. The other one school of thought, which is the main representative of the other approach, was the Hanafi madhab. They said, no, we have a lot of fatwas and verdicts from the Sahaba until the first class of the madhab. So they explored all these fatwas, and based on these fatwas and verdicts, they structured their usul methodology. And they kept fighting for a long time, which one is better, good fightings. That this one is more productive, this one is more accurate. And then they kept developing both until maybe the 6th or 7th Muslim Hijri century. And they tried to develop a new third way which combines both together. They call it طريقة الجمع بين الطريقتين. They said like how to combine the 2 ways together. And they kept developing. Usul al-Fiqh got in a long process of development. But that's another topic. The main point here is that fiqh is concerned with the knowledge of the detailed rulings themselves. Something is haram, is halal, is makruh, these terminologies. Usul al-Fiqh concerns with the methods that are applied in the deductions of these things. Like the point I thought about of the default implication of a default, of a command is obligation. You have the pre-assumption of continuity. They have to be there all the time. These things, Usul al-Fiqh is concerned with these like rules in general. Okay, so the general evidences of Islamic law, right? This is the first part of the definition. Number 1, general evidences of Islamic law. Why did we call it general before we move on this point? Because we deal with the principle itself, not with a detailed evidence. So there is a general evidence and a detailed evidence. I think I mentioned this before. When I tell you Quran is an evidence, as a whole, the whole thing of the Quran is an evidence, right? That's a general evidence. When I'm telling you وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, establish prayer, that's an evidence, that's a detailed evidence. Which one Usul al-Fiqh deals with? The Quran in general, or وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ specifically? Usul al-Fiqh. The legal theory deals with this, with what of them, with which one of them first? With the Quran as a source of rulings, or with these details? What?
the source.
The source. So it talks about first that why Quran is a hujjah, is an evidence by itself, right? And then it tells you about the general commands of the Quran, the general prohibitions of the Quran. It's usul al-fiqh. And then when you come to apply these rules, you would say, okay, salah is obligatory. That's fiqh, that's not usul al-fiqh. This sentence, this statement, salah is obligatory, is not usul al-fiqh. That's a fiqh. This is the deduction. This is the end of the process. The beginning of the process that Quran is an evidence, that's usul al-fiqh. A command implies obligation, that's usul al-fiqh. Pre-assumption of continuity, that's usul al-fiqh. Customs of people, that's usul al-fiqh. Consensus, usul al-fiqh. Analogy, usul al-fiqh. All these things are usul al-fiqh. But prayer is obligatory, fiqh. Interest is haram, fiqh. Alcohol is haram, fiqh. These details are fiqh. This is the difference between fiqh and usul al-fiqh. So this is the first part of the definition. The second part is the manners in which they are used for inference. They are used, we're talking about the evidences, the general evidences. So you have like standard logical rules that enable you to understand the Quran and the Sunnah. Just one example. When there are any kind of an apparent contradiction, as they call it, you find 2 texts in the Quran or 2 texts in the Sunnah that they are contradicting each other. How would you deal with this? So I gave an example of two hadiths. Both are authentically reported in the famous major collections of hadith. One hadith, both talking about wudu. One hadith said the Prophet ﷺ made ablution of wudu and he washed his feet. Another authentic hadith, he said he made ablution and he sprinkled water on his feet. How can we understand these two hadith? We have the option one, we take one and reject the other one. We have option two, we try to reconcile between both and to come up with like a common understanding of both. We have the option number three that we applied in both, which is illogical because you can't, because it's two contradicting things. So which option we can go for?
You can go with the option of setting. So identifying the setting when he washed and when he sprinkled.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, he did both, but each one is in a different setting, different environment, different setup. Like if he had it without socks, you wash. With socks, maybe you sprinkle, you just mess it. So
what if the hadith or the story doesn't state this? We didn't know. Just the hadith came like this. The narration didn't specify the situation, the setting, as you said. Are we still allowed to make this interpretation?
There is also another hadith where they say, "Wailun lil a'qab min an-nar." They're talking about the feet also, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, maybe sprinkling water will be enough for this too.
Would it cover this part?
He said, why don't that? The water needs to go there, so maybe sprinkling is enough. Right? Both are watered, but one with washing and one with just sprinkling some water. It could be a supportive evidence, I'm not doubting this, but I mean, it's not as clear as these two ones. So now we're not making the process of reconciling the hadith, that's not our job now, but I'm saying this is an example of how to deal with these contradictions is through the science. It would give you like a full detailed manual. When you find contradictions, how do you deal with this? And it would tell you, okay, you need to explore other hadith. You need to see which one has a kind of, as they call it, universal applicability. Which one is am? Which one has a particular applicability, which is the khas? And then you say, okay, is there any other hadith? Is there any other weak hadith that would add more details? Can you come up with the date of each hadith? Because if one hadith came after the other one, it can abrogate the one that was before, right? It has millions of possibilities. Sometimes when they go over all these possibilities and they're still unable to find out a way to reconcile, they would say, okay, let's check the profile of the narrator of the hadith himself. Sometimes they would go that far. If everything is equal between the two hadith. By the way, the last thing that will come to the mind is that let's reject one of them. This number one, how much they respect the Sunnah, and it's number two, how much they respect this very accurate methodology of documenting the Sunnah, because they know the hadith when the hadith came to us as Sahih, it went through a huge process of refinement. When it reached us, it's authentic. We're not going to talk about his authenticity anymore, because it's authentic. You're going to say, oh, that's da'if. No, it's not da'if. It's Sahih. It's not an easy way to reject the hadith. If it's authentic, you have to deal with it. So they go with lot. It's a very long process. They call it. It's a topic by itself in Usul al-Fiqh. They call it at-ta'arud, the contradiction. If it happens, how do you deal with it? So you have a lot of possibilities that would go all the way to check the profile of the narrator. Okay, if you have two narrators of these two hadith, for example, and one of them was more famous with his fiqh than the other one, we'd go for this one. If this is the last thing that you can just like find out to reconcile between these two hadith, at some point they might reach to a point that there is no way to reconcile between both, which is very rare to happen. But it might, doesn't happen a lot in fiqh, but sometimes that would happen. And they would have to come up with another solution. They would say, okay, maybe, so both are okay. You can do both. Maybe the first one is the default and the second one just to give us another option that you can do it. We would have a lot of other interpretations. But again, it wasn't by any means the option that, okay, let's reject this hadith. The concept of rejection of hadith was not there at all. The maximum, the most extreme position they took is that, okay, you know what? I'm going to make waqf. Waqf, which means we don't know. We've done our best. We examined all the sources that we have. We don't know how to reconcile this. We make waqf. And that's a perfect and a very beautiful stance that they would take. They respect knowledge. They respect themselves first, and then they respect knowledge, and then they respect the generation that would come after them. They said maybe another scholar would come in the future and he would solve this problem. It's not just like they are stubborn, okay, they just reject this hadith. Right? That happens with us nowadays a lot. Oh, this hadith doesn't make sense to me. We want to reject it. We just, the first thought you give to the hadith and you want to reject it. That happens with a lot of people. He even is not willing to just read a couple pages about the hadith and will tell you, this hadith doesn't make sense. How come this hadith is there in Al-Bukhari? Let's just reject this hadith. We should actually take this hadith out from Al-Bukhari and from these books and just throw them away because they don't make any sense. And maybe they're not willing to read just one single page about each hadith. Okay, what is the history of this hadith? A lot of things that affect these processes. Even sometimes one person was asking me that about hadith, okay, this hadith doesn't make any sense to me. So I asked him, do you know the title of the chapter that Imam al-Bukhari reported this hadith under? Is it like, would it really matter? It matters a lot. I'm like, dude, like people wrote PhDs on just the titles of the chapters of Al-Bukhari. Like the way he structured the chapters, really, people wrote a lot of PhDs on this. Why would he choose this? And it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. And I give you a nasiha. When you read any hadith, look at the title of the chapter. You will be shocked. Sometimes a hadith about wudu, you'll find the chapter of Iman, faith. Sometimes a hadith about some contests and competitions that would happen in some sports that would be playing, you'll find it in the book of Al-Maghazi wa Siyar, the battles of the Prophet. The book of Jihad. You find sometimes what appears to you is that there's no 1% of relation between the hadith and the chapter and the title of the chapter itself. So you need to dig deeper and understand why. And he didn't do it because he was just like putting things together. He did this on purpose. He would put part of the hadith in a chapter and the rest in another chapter. He did all these things on purpose because he would make istikhara and pray 2 rak'ahs for every single hadith he put in his book, Imam al-Bukhari. So before every single, he memorized like almost 1 million hadith. And his book is like 4,000, 5,000 hadith. He said, before every single hadith I put in my book, I would pray after a long time of not only he would pray 2 rak'ahs, that's the end of his process. He would spend a lot of time examining this hadith and then he would pray 2 rak'ah, make istikhara and then add this hadith. So that's why people now, again, they're writing PhDs on Fiqh al-Imam al-Bukhari fi tarajim. Tarajim means the titles of the chapters. How did he make these titles of the chapters of his book? So this is the concept of ta'arud and the contradictions between the hadith. And then the last one, the last part of the definition, the characteristics of the one who uses these evidences for inference. The jurist or the faqih or the scholar who exercises a kind of independent reasoning, and for sure he has to have a complete mastery of all the tools that we're going to talk about them, he's the one who can actually use these rulings. And we'll talk about the definition of al-mujtahid, the conditions of al-mujtahid, and the types of mujtahids. That's a chapter by itself in Usul al-Fiqh. And here comes the question, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, were they mujtahideen and jurists or not? Were they qualified people to give personal independent reasoning, to give ahkam? The companions of the Prophet? Any sahabi, like let's say we meet with any sahabi. By default, he's a mujtahid. We haven't defined mujtahid yet, but again, a person who is qualified to give his own personal opinion and the rulings from the sources of legislation. So what do you think? They're not?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're getting it right hot from the oven.
What?
They're getting
No,
it right.
after his death.
After what?
After his death, yeah.
No, not all of them. Only those who have been given direct, maybe recognition from the Prophet ﷺ, giving Umar, or certain narration the Prophet ﷺ said about someone like if there was a prophet behind after me, it would be Umar. I think the hadith was Mufawwad or something. I'm not sure.
Mulham.
Mulham, yeah. So specific people, because there's a statement where I think you gave us the example when some person had an injured head and they said no, you have to do it. So that just shows that not all of them had a level of.
So in order for us to accept some of their verdicts or statements, that means we have to have an authentic report from the Prophet that he's recognizing his.
No, for statements, if they're saying what they saw, what they was narrating.
No, I mean a statement and verdicts and fatwa. Or,
yeah. That not all of them, again, not to belittle anyone, but not all of them can make ijtihad, but all of them can do narration to say what.
Yeah, I'm not talking about narration. Narration is different. Anybody can make narration.
No,
but
yes, not all of them can make ijtihad.
okay. So, what did the Prophet ﷺ teach the Sahaba? That's the subject matter. What did he teach them? Now we can understand the subject matter of Usul al-Fiqh. It's the general Islamic legal sources. Okay. The question to understand the subject matter more, how did we get this Usul al-Fiqh? We said, we based it on the Quran and logic and the Sunnah and this stuff. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ was the messenger of God, right? He delivered certain things to the companions. What are these things? What is the first thing that he delivered? The Wahy, the Quran, right? The second thing, the Sunnah, his statements and his, whether it's verbal statements or actions, right? Are these two things the only things that he gave to the Sahaba? He gave them the Quran in full. He is trustworthy. He gave all the Quran to the Sahaba. Okay. Then he gave a lot of explanations and things from his Sunnah to the Sahaba. That's it. That was his message, and then he died. Any thoughts?
Demonstration of what is required from the Quran.
From what?
From the Quran itself, what the Quran is doing. I mean, he used كان قرآنا يمشي على الأرض.
Okay, so when he is giving them a hadith, when he's telling them do this, do not do this, all the Sunnah is about this. Do that, don't do that. That's the Quran. Eat this way, drink this way, dress this way, and that's it. Or sometimes he would add little more tips with these statements or commands or prohibitions. So basically the answer is no, it's not only the Quran and the Sunnah. Maybe just this is 50% of what he gave them. He gave them these textual knowledge, that's the Quran, that's the Sunnah. And then he gave them the ways they understand this Quran and the Sunnah. He didn't teach them only words, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He gave them a text, Quran, and then he gave them a text, which is a Sunnah, and then he gave them the ways they can understand this. Scholars say this is as your both eyes. So one eye is the Quran and the Sunnah. The other eye is the ways that, which is translated later to be Usul al-Fiqh. The ways you understand the Quran and the Sunnah. Right? You need both eyes to see things. You cannot just have the textual knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. There are a lot of examples of this. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you reflect on the Sunnah, you will find a lot of examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he revealed the ayah, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُم بِظُلْمٍ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said this who believe, and they didn't mix their belief with injustice, those are the ones who will have security, and those are the ones who will be guided. So the Sahaba, they got panicked after this ayah was revealed. And they went to the Prophet and said, Rasulullah, وَأَيُّنَا لَا يَظْلِمُ نَفْسَهُ. Every one of us has some sort of injustice. Every one of us has wronged himself before. That means all of us, we're not going to be in security. All of us, we're not going to be guided because we commit dhulm and injustice against ourselves. So the Prophet ﷺ told them, no, it's not the way you thought. This is what he said literally. لَيْسَ كَمَا تَظُنُّونَ. It's not the way you thought. It's like what he said, it's talking about Allah. It's like what he said in a different ayah when he said, وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. So it's like what Luqman told his son, shirk, associating partners with Allah, is great injustice, is a great wrongdoing. Okay, what is he telling them by this example? Okay, so this is the meaning of dhulm in this context, right? Okay, what is the bigger image that he's showing them?
You guys are not unjust.
What?
You guys are not falling within this injustice.
No, as a methodology of understanding. Okay, we understand. They understood that now we're good, right? So they were more reassured, but he was teaching them something else. Yes, this part of it. Some parts of the Quran would explain other parts. And that's a big part of the tafsir. Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an. You explain the Quran with the Quran. That became a principle to us later. And we understood it from this hadith. We understood that when you have one word in the Quran that is being repeatedly mentioned, you need to exercise and to explore all of them and to put all of them in whether one context, if they fit in one context or different contexts. That's why sometimes a dhulm comes for multiple meanings in the Quran. Sometimes you get one word with multiple meanings in the Quran. The way you understand this is through going through these different words in the Quran. That's why Usul al-Fiqh has this process. Number one, you cannot give a verdict or deduce a ruling out of a text in the Quran and the Sunnah without exploring all the rest of the text. Right? This is what when I said about وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, they did explore all the other commands about salah. About pray as if you saw me praying. They did explore all the other commands about prayer. And then you would come up with the conclusion, this is the way you need to pray. So جمع الأدلة, you gather all the evidences that you have, all the evidences that are accessible to you, you gather all of them. And then you put all of them together on the same level, and then you try to categorize them into multiple categories that, okay, they all can fit in one meaning, or they can fit in multiple levels, or multiple meanings, or multiple implications. That's why one chapter of Usul al-Fiqh is dalalatul al-alfaz, the implications or the significations of words. That's a huge chapter of Usul al-Fiqh. Why? Because you need to know what is the meaning of dhulm. Said, okay, dhulm came in the Quran with 5 different meanings, for example. This is one of the things that you come up with in Usul al-Fiqh. That's why, what is the fruit? Number 3 of the principles. For the jurist himself, he would know how to extract the legal rulings. Okay, for us, we're not jurists, we're not like qualified mujtahideen. So you need to respect the field, basically. You need to respect the field of specialization in these things. You need to understand that a text by itself wouldn't give you the full, clear verdict or opinion on the ruling that you want. Because you need to do a lot of other homework before coming up with this conclusion. It's not as easy as, okay, the hadith says that, let's just do it. No, it's not that easy. The ayah says that, let's just do it. No, because there's another ayah that you might not be aware of. There's other hadith who specifies the ayah. Right? There's other hadith that quantifies the ayah. Right? There are a lot of different options and possibilities that would happen to the dalil. Another thing of the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba, one other example of the ways of understanding that he offered them, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. When the ayah of fasting was revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah, and he was explaining to them that you fast from dawn time to sunset. So he said, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. That's part of the ayah of the Siyam. He said, eat and drink until the white thread of the dawn becomes distinct to you from the black thread of the night. Okay? So one Sahabi, what he did is that he brought 2 different threads, one black and one white, and he put them under his pillow. And he kept waking up every 5-10 minutes and check, can I just distinguish between both or not? And he's measuring the time by this. Right? And then he got very tired. He said, it's impossible. If I'm gonna keep doing this every day, that's really a lot of work. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he was so frustrated. He said, that's impossible. You need to give us an alternative for this. What did he do? He took it literally, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he was shocked with the way he understood it. And he said, إِنَّ وِسَادَكَ إِذًا لَعَرِيض. He said, your pillow is so big. That was a joke that he made that you will never be able to figure it out. Right? Because your pillow actually is covering the thread. So you will never be able to see the black from the white. Then he told him, no, it's not the way you think. The same thing he told him before. He said, that's the brightness of the day and the darkness of the night. إِنَّمَا هُوَ بَيَاضُ اللَّيْلِ وَسَوَادُ النَّهَارِ. Again, what is he teaching him there? What is he teaching this Sahabi here? Adi ibn Hatim, that was the name of the Sahaba. He's teaching him that you cannot just understand or try to deduce rulings literally like this. You need other things with you. You need the tool of language so you understand that there is a literal word and there's a figurative word or a metaphorical word. It's one of the things that you need to know. And it's one of the tools of Usul al-Fiqh. You need to understand that there is another ayah, for example, if that's the case. So what the scholars did, basically, they gathered all these incidents together. They collected all these ahadith and stories from the Sahaba, all these interactions. The story of Bani Qurayza, the story of this Sahabi who gave him a wrong fatwa about taking a bath and he had his head injured, all these different things. They gathered them together, they examined them, and then they came up with principles. So they could understand, okay, so the Prophet ﷺ is indicating to this Sahabi of the fasting issue is that you need to understand that language has literal and metaphor. You need to understand that if you're not qualified, you shouldn't be given a verdict. This is what he told him. That's why he scolded him for a bit. He told him no, what you're doing is wrong. And he scolded Allah, the people who give the other person a wrong fatwa that killed him at the end. So he taught them all these different methods, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and then we kept developing them until we came up with this ilm. So you can understand that the merits and the fadl of this ilm, that's one of the most noble and important sciences, because you can know through it what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you as a mukallaf, as a person who is an individual responsible in Islam. The relations to other disciplines of Usul al-Fiqh, the relations to other sciences, is that it's one of the ulum that are very related to a lot of other branches, but it is based on a lot of other branches too. It's a combo of different things. This is the way Usul al-Fiqh is structured. You need language, you need logic, you need theology, you need fiqh. All these things together, they combine the science of Usul al-Fiqh and kept developed until we had it in this final shape. And for sure, it interacts with a lot of other circles of knowledge too. If you want to structure the science of Usul al-Fiqh, you need these four things basically. You need to know aqidah, you need to know language, you need to know logic, you need to know fiqh. A common mistake people make when they are learning Islam or learning like Islamic sciences, if they start with Usul al-Fiqh at the beginning. That's a common mistake. And it's wrong. I mean, in academically, that's wrong. In an educational setup, that shouldn't be the case. Maybe you study something as introduction to Usul al-Fiqh, maybe. You study the history of Usul al-Fiqh, maybe. But if you want to study Usul al-Fiqh itself as a science, that's wrong. And if you attend a halaqah or a course or class about Usul al-Fiqh, you attend as, okay, I'm just taking an idea about this science. I'm taking an introductory course to Usul al-Fiqh. But you will not be able to get the full picture because it's really difficult. And you're not going to be able to examine this or to apply this to other things. Why? Because you need to have a big background of these four things. You need aqidah, you need creed or Islamic theology, you need language, you need logic, you need fiqh. Right? So why do we need aqidah? What does aqidah have to do with usul al-fiqh?
You have to understand and know who Allah is, to know his knowledge, his religion. You have to know, for example, Ar-Rahman, ala al-arsh istawa. So from the essence of aqidah, you know that Allah, fawq al-arsh, Allah is above. And then from there you interpret ala al-arsh istawa.
So aqidah gives us the proper understanding of Godship or of uluhiyya,
Yes.
and then usul al-fiqh will do what?
Well, through Usul al-Fiqh, you can get proper understanding of what is intended or what does it mean.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Why do we need aqidah for usul al-fiqh? But that's the fiqh thing. We talk about aqidah and usul al-fiqh. Theology and principles of fiqh. So now I'm approaching usul al-fiqh to study it. Do I need a prerequisite level of aqidah or theology to be able to understand usul al-fiqh? As a student of knowledge.
I think that aqidah is important because it's you have to have the belief in the Quran and the Sunnah, and then after that know the usul fiqh and the methods how to whether interpret or understand those rules. How am I going to understand the rules of something that I don't believe in?
Yeah, maybe just out of curiosity.
Pardon me?
Maybe just out of curiosity, I'm doing this. Do I have to be a Muslim to study usul al-fiqh? A lot of Orientalists who study usul al-fiqh specifically, they love it. So because it's a linguistic approach too. Most of the scholars of hermeneutics in the Western academia, they study usul al-fiqh because it's based on a big part of language. So I can just study Islam and I'm not a Muslim, right? But I agree with you. It's important not only to believe in it. If a Muslim, that should be the intention for sure. If I'm a Muslim, I'm studying it not for no purpose. I'm studying it to apply and to benefit myself and people. But If you look at it just as a ilm we are studying, maybe I'm just studying it because I'm curious to know what is this ilm about. But yeah, basically the creed or the aqidah teaches us that we are believing servants, right? Which requires you to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to do. So one example of a prerequisite issue in aqidah that you need to be very well versed on before studying it in Usul al-Fiqh is the definition of a legal authority. Legal in shar'i, not legal in laws in the modern civil laws. I'm talking about the Islamic or the divine law in general. What is the meaning of authority? Who has the right to state a legal ruling? That's aqidah issue. That's a big chapter in Usul al-Fiqh. Al-Hakim, they call it Al-Hakim. The ruler, but not the literal meaning. The one who is the only one who is actually able to give rulings, or has the absolute right to give rulings, legal or shar'i rulings. This is a big part of it. Hakim wal mahkum, the one who gives rulings, and how should we be like receptives of these rulings, for example.
That is why it came right at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. الإسلام من ذلك الكتاب لا ريب هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم يؤمنون بالغيب ده جزء كبير جدا من This is a big part of the.
Yes, and they actually mentioned it before the practice. He mentioned the belief of the unseen at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah before you practice. So he mentioned those who believe in the unseen and practice prayer. Right? Because of how much it's related to believe in the unseen. Okay, that's fiqh and theology. A lot of other examples between theology and usul al-fiqh, I mean. Why do we need language for usul al-fiqh? Everything is language, right? Everything goes around language. You need language for everything in life. So, usul al-fiqh deals with a text. And this text is in a certain language. So you need language to understand this. And actually that's really the biggest part. This dalalatul alfad, the significations of words that I talked about. Imam al-Ghazali, for example, said that's umdat usul al-fiqh. That's the main pillar of the ilm of usul al-fiqh is the significations of verbs or of words in general. The categories of phrases, that's a chapter or a topic in usul al-fiqh to know, which is grammar basically, nouns, verbs, and particles. You study this in usul al-fiqh. That's why if you have it a little bit covered in language beforehand, you enter the science of usul al-fiqh and you are well actually equipped with these tools before you examine them. The concept of the literal and the figurative, that's part of the science of the rhetoric of balagha, and that's one of the linguistic branches of ilm. The phrases of universal or particular applicability, al-aam wal-khas. That's also part of grammar and rhetoric. When you say kull, like all things are like that, or nothing is like that. These words that you use to negate something or to prove the relation between things, those are linguistic usages of these words. And you need to understand them to understand the words in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You need logic for usul al-fiqh too, because it helps you organize your ideas and thoughts, and then you can make deductive arguments. You can make analogy. When we explained analogy last time, we talked about the alcohol and the other drugs, for example, that have the same effect. The way you attribute the hukm to both, you need analogy. You need logic. Because logic will tell you how to construct deductive argument, how to make like a qiyas, an analogy, how to build the premises and to come to a proper, authentic conclusion out of these principles. That's analogy, and you need it for sure in the science of usul al-fiqh. The founder of this ilm, this number 6 of the foundations, we explained the concept of founder before that. Again, he's not the person who initiated it from scratch, the one who was the first person to write about this ilm. And the first book that we have in a written form, printed and published nowadays is the book of Imam al-Shafi'i, Al-Risala. He called it Al-Risala, the message. He called it the message because there was nothing written about usul fiqh at that time. And one person from Egypt was named Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, was a scholar of hadith. He wrote a letter to Imam al-Shafi'i, and he was still in Mecca the first time he wrote to him. And he asked him he wrote him a letter and he said, can you please describe to us your process of understanding the Quran? That was his question. So he wrote just an answer to this Imam to answer him like, this is the way I'm understanding the Quran. And this work, that was amazing work, became the first written form of usul al-fiqh in history. It is not the way that we have the books of usul al-fiqh now. Just very pure general thoughts Imam al-Shafi'i put in this book that are so genius. And it's so beautiful to read. It's translated into English, by the way. it's so beautiful to read in this book. It's really interesting to experience a science and its different levels of development. Like, I don't know if it's written to everybody, but if you look at a science and you get a book that was written on this science in like 10 centuries ago, and that was maybe among the very first works that were written on this field, and you read it, and then you read something that was written on the same field in 2018, right? And you can see the difference between both and how the ideas got developed, not just in themselves as ideas, and the way people are expressing about the ideas. This is the same thing. Read a Risala, for example, it's really a high level, and read like a modern book on Usul Al-Fiqh. You'll find a huge difference. I'm not just talking about the levels of scholarship between Imam Shafi'i and any other author, for sure there is a big difference, but even the ways they are describing the thoughts. That one of the Mashayikh used to tell us that Imam Shafi'i, he entered his mind, he was trying to make it easy for us. He said like he entered his mind and he tried to figure out what I'm doing in my mind. Because he used to give fatwas just like in a personal intellect, right? But he never explained all these terminologies, they were not there. There was no the word of general, specific, quantifiable, universal, particular. All these terms, they were not there. Actually, people said when we attended the Majlis of Al-Shafi'i, we found out that he's saying words that were never heard before in our life because he's using these words. So people start asking like, what are these words? So you keep thinking, okay, I'm just expressing about what's in my mind. If you open the book, you find that, okay, you say, if you find this in the Quran, that means Allah wants to tell you this in a very pure, generic way, because nobody ever wrote about this before. That's why it's one of the first work that was written in Usul al-Fiqh. His student, Imam al-Muzani, rahimahullah, one of the students of Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, I've been looking into the book of al-Shafi'i, al-Risala, for 50 years. I've been reading this book, like more and more. He said, I do not recall a single time I looked at this book without learning something new. And usually when we say these stories, say this about a book a human being wrote, so how about the book of Allah? Right? 50 years, and he's a scholar. He reached the level of almost an independent qualified scholar, which we gotta explain this term of independent scholar. The one who just doesn't have to refer to anybody, he just gives the fatwas himself. He said, I've been reading it for 50 years, I'm still learning new things from the book of Al-Shafi'i. And this book, by the way, was copied by his own students. One of his students, his name was Al-Rabi', he copied it. Shafi'i was dictating the book to them in the Majlis, and they would write whatever he's saying, and then they published. But he approved this book to be published later. By the way, the original copy of the student of Imam Shafi'i, the original copy that was written at that time, Imam Shafi'i, like in the 2nd century, like 13 centuries ago more. The original copy of his student Al-Rabi' was there in the Egyptian Museum. And then 7 years ago, it got stolen. We don't know where it did go, actually. And this is the way we respect our heritage. We don't know where did it go, but the original copy was there. Like the book is published already and has multiple copies. But people used to give very high respect to the original manuscripts. The name of the science is Usul al-Fiqh. That's common sense. And the sources, we thought about that it's based on aqidah, fiqh, language, and logic. This is in the biggest part of it. The ruling of this, it applies to most of other rulings, that there is a communal obligation that people need to have this science mastered because we need them to give us new verdicts and fatwas. And there is the personal obligation if there is no one to take the initiative to study this. But in general, this is different than the fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh is generally communal obligation. Why? Because there is no percentage of personal obligation for you to study Usul al-Fiqh because you didn't need to. There is a percentage of personal obligation for you to study fiqh, right? Because you need to pray and you need to practice. But Usul al-Fiqh, no, you don't need to know about Usul al-Fiqh if you're not interested in this field. But as a community, we need to have people who are able to give ahkam and fatwas. People who can... this ijtihad has to stay every era. Scholars used to say that. Every era of Muslims, there has to be a kind of a mujtahid or a group of mujtahideen who would actually represent the Islamic principles and give the proper fatwas and opinions for Muslims and for the communities. The scholars used to say every certain amount of kilometers, there has to be a faqih. There has to be a person who is able to give a fatwa. Usually they would measure the distance with the distance of qasr al-salah. for a lot of different ahkam. This is the beautiful thing about fiqh. So you know the distance of qasr salah is around, you're talking about 80 kilometers. The far distance, we call it safar al-tawil. The far travel, the far distance travel is around 80 kilometers. If you're traveling for 80 kilometers plus, you are able to shorten the prayer from 4 to 2, and you can combine 2 prayers, right? So they actually have stated a lot of different ahkam related to this number. They said, okay, so in every 80 kilometers, there has to be a faqih, which is not the case nowadays for sure. But they said that this is what has to happen. And every single service that is essential for the Muslim community has to exist within this area. So if Muslims are suffering within 80 kilometers from the lack of good Muslim doctor, and they need that Muslim doctor, so the whole community is responsible for this. If they're suffering from the lack of a person to teach them how to read Quran, they're all responsible for this. Anything that is essential to their well-being, from a spiritual point of view, from a physical point of view, they gotta be responsible as a community for these things. And they have collectively to offer the service for themselves and for the community. The topics of Usul al-Fiqh, we already mentioned a lot of examples. All these are different examples of the topics of Usul al-Fiqh, the divine legal norms, the sources of law, the rules of deduction, commands and prohibitions, ambiguity and clarification. All these different things are topics of the ilm of Usul al-Fiqh, all the way until you come to the ijtihad and the taqleed, the personal reasoning and the imitation or the taqleed. We talked about the 5 rulings before, the different categories of ahkam, al-hukm al-taklifi, the obligatory, the recommended, the permissible, the makruh, the forbidden. And there are other ahkam that you base these 5 categories on. You guys are bored, right? I think you're done. You can absorb any new things. It's 7:28, so 2 minutes left, right? And I don't know. I know we didn't have a break today because we prayed Maghrib already, and we can pray Isha inshallah later. So how much you're bored? And be honest. I'm not gonna be offended. Don't worry. I know it's Usul al-Fiqh is a little bit dry and a heavy topic. How many minutes I'm allowed to go over time? So they gave me the permission. So how about you? لا ينسب لساكت قول. I don't know, like if you guys are silent, I cannot get your permission on this. Should we stop here? Yes? Alhamdulillah. Now we have a verbal consent on. Okay, so yeah, this point is a little bit needs some more sharh and explanation. So inshallah, but we almost finished the slides. We'll send you these slides inshallah for Usul al-Fiqh, and next time we'll finish them, and then we'll move to the science of Aqidah inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Okay, before this, is there any question? Hukm al-Wad'i. Okay, that's why I don't want to explain it now. It's basically things that to get to the hukm taklifi, to say something that is obligatory or recommended, there are some signs, they call it this way, some signs that Islam put for you to know this hukm. So for you, just I'm going to give one example. For the first one, the sabab, the legal cause. Okay, when Salat al-Dhuhr will be mandatory on you to pray? When do you have to pray Salat al-Dhuhr? When the adhan is made? At what?
Just beyond.
Okay, so let's say they call it Zawal al-Shams. So the Dhuhr time is at 1 or now like 12:45, for example, or 12:30. That's the time when that's the Dhuhr time, right? So they call it a sabab. Sabab fi wujub al-Dhuhr is Zawal al-Shams. So they said the legal cause of Dhuhr to be obligatory on you individually is that now it's 12:30. That's the meaning of sabab. 12:20, Dhuhr is not obligatory on you. What would make Dhuhr obligatory on you is the 12:30 thing, is the time. That's a sabab for that's the legal cause for the obligation. So there is a legal cause for obligation. There's a prerequisite for the obligation, right? I'm telling you, your salah will not be valid if you don't have wudu, because tahara is a condition for salah to be valid. Facing the qibla is a condition for the salah to be valid. That's a shart. A mani', impediment. I'm telling you, if you're not on wudu, you cannot pray. So the fact that I don't have water, for example. So the fact that I don't have water, that means I have a mani', I have an impediment that I cannot perform prayer because I cannot. So that's why they have 2 different categories of the ahkam. And they have the azima wa rukhsa, the strict law, and the concessionary law that You have an option like when you're traveling and then you can combine prayers, you can shorten prayers, all these things. Those are not the ahkam themselves, they are things related to the ahkam. There are things that are organizing the process of coming up with this ahkam of wajib and makruh, mustahab, etc. So we'll talk about it more next time, inshallah. Yes.
Okay, I have a question just before we move on. I was asked, you know how last time you said that you can't combine the opinions of other madhab in one prayer?
Mhm.
So the question I was asked was, how could this be a rule where the madhab came after the Prophet ﷺ? And how about if a person doesn't even know the different madhab or the rulings in the prayer? So we can be combining the different opinions of the four madhab in one prayer as well.
Those two questions, right?
Yes, so if you can please just.
The first question I didn't get it.
I
So
don't know how to answer.
no, the first question I didn't get it exactly. So
Okay, so
the madhab
question
came after the
is-
Prophet?
Yeah, so why can't we combine the four madhab in one prayer? They came after the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ prayed in every way that they mentioned. So they're all right opinions. And what's the problem if we combine?
No, because every one of them has one way of understanding what the Prophet did.
Yeah, okay.
So if and each way is an authentic and an ilmi way. So when they develop it and they come to a conclusion, this conclusion is authentic because the process was authentic. But you have to take it in full. But if you take part of this process and you mix it with another process, there's a very high chance that you would come up with a third option that is not there. That didn't happen already. And usually people do that to get an easy opinion. Right? Which is most of the cases. What?
Which leads to the second part that if you're praying anyways, you have no idea what they're different.
No, the second question is completely different. But the first question, the fact that they came after the Prophet doesn't mean anything because, again, they built a way of understanding what the Prophet did. So for you to be logical and applicable, you have to follow one way. If you mix multiple ways, this is not going to work. Because this is not logical. Why? Because one of them deals with rukhsa and azima in a way that is different than the other one. One of them deals with the commands and prohibitions in a way than the other one. So if you pick and choose, you're going to come up with a principle that doesn't exist, which is illogical. And you're going to follow a lot of contradictions.
Which a lot of people don't understand.
What?
Which a lot of people don't understand.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm saying that without him knowing, he would find a lot of contradictions. Because this Imam, he built this methodology based on, as we said last time, that's an easy example. Imam Malik, he said, I'm going to go for the practice of the people of Al-Madinah. So he built his wudu this way, for example. Imam Shafi'i built his wudu, no, we have 5 ahadith, just verbal ahadith, for example, that are saying this is the way people should make wudu. If I pick and choose between both, that's not a good mix. There's a possibility that would be correct, but I'm not going to be able to be sure about this to be correct. Right? Because the two methodologies are different. So I'm not actually applicable and logical following these two things. It's about logical way of getting the hukm. Because the chance of me making a mistake is huge. And I'm not going to be able to find out I'm doing mistakes or not. You get the point? The second point, no, it's different because it's only about ilm. He needs to know.
And if he doesn't?
He has to know. He has to know. So you have two options. He has two options. Number one, he studies one madhab just as a peace of mind. One madhab, I'm going to follow it. That's it. That's a peace of mind. Or no, sometimes I found in situations that I want to get another madhab to just solve my issue, which is okay. So I'm going to learn more than one madhab in this ibadah. And he has to do that because he has to learn how to pray anyway. Right? So some people take it the way that, okay, I'm going to learn how to pray according to Hanafi madhab. I'm going to stick to this. That's it.
But like, if you were to follow that, like there's a sense of some then you have, there's books out there, for example, I don't know what's
Sifat Salatun Nabi.
and you just follow the rules there.
This book, I don't recommend it by any means.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, so-
Why? So number one, so he said, pray as you saw me pray. No one of us saw him pray. Right? What is the only way that we can pray as he was praying? So we learn from a scholar, we learn from a scholar, we learn from a scholar, we learn from a scholar until he went to the Sahabi and said, I saw him doing this. Right? He said, Kama ra'aytumuni, as you saw me praying. So they saw him, and there's a lot of hadith about salah, by the way, it's not verbal, just statements, do this or do not do this. A lot of hadith about salah specifically are just practical hadith. Sahabi would stand up among his students and would say, I will pray in front of you as I saw the Prophet praying, and he would demonstrate the prayer. A lot of hadith about prayers are like this. That's why he said that. Sallu kama ra'aytumuni yusalli. That's what he asked his companions to do. Okay? So this is the way that was delivered to us. And the most authentic way we got for the prayer was through the four madhahib because of all these reasons we mentioned. Right? The problem about this book is that the author of this book, he said, okay, yeah, the madhahib, four madhahib said this, but no, that's against the hadith. So we should follow this hadith and we shouldn't go for this madhab. So again, we fall in the same contradiction that we talked about last time. Okay, how would you know that they didn't know about this hadith? And how would you know that they don't have a stronger dalil? And he didn't even study, and he didn't even examine the rest of the evidences that those madhab offered. He just offered his own personal opinion. So he's offering his own personal opinion. He's not actually offering something new, or maybe it's new, but it might not be right. That's what I'm saying. He didn't offer a proper dalil that what the madhab mentioned are wrong. Right? That's why, in my opinion, a lot of discussions about a lot of things in Salah now, with the intention of bringing something new, it's ridiculous. Because you can't. So we have disagreements on the way we put our hands in the Salah. Someone said, like, put it here, put it there, put it down there. Okay, you have 3 or 4 opinions. Why are you studying this and trying to make a stronger opinion than the other one? You will never be able to do this. Because they have killed it, studying. You can study if you're a student of knowledge, for sure, because you need to learn the process. So you have to study this. But if you are just an average Muslim, if you go forever with all this adillah, you'll end up with nothing. I mean, you can be convinced with one opinion, but again, as I said last time, that wouldn't add anything other than, okay, you're convinced with an opinion, you're not convinced with the other one. That's okay. But the other opinion is still there. What?
So you need a teacher that knows to actually show you how to pray.
Yeah, but I'm talking about yeah, for sure, that's number one. You need a teacher to teach you how to pray. And number 2, you need to know that, again, I said this last time, I'm convinced with an opinion, that doesn't mean anything about the other opinion. So one thing that we really need to know, which should be a common sense, but I think we have to state it every now and then, that people come to different conclusions, right? This sounds axiomatic to us, but we don't actually act on this. Because, okay, I'm convinced that this is the way I should put my hands in the prayer. Okay, I can bring you millions of other hadith that the Prophet ﷺ put his hands a little bit down than this, which is the opinion of the Hanafi madhab, for example. Right? Maliki sometimes they pray like this. They just make irsal. They don't put their hands. And by the way, there's no explicit hadith about this. Go explore all the books of Sunnah. There's no explicit hadith. And you'll find like 10, 15, 20 hadith about multiple positions he put his hands on. That's why they differed. They didn't differ just for the sake of being different. They differed because they had multiple hadith. And then they had all these different criteria to weigh the arguments and come up with different conclusions. So back to the question, he needs to learn whether one madhab if he wants, or needs to learn more, he has to learn more. But he has to learn just this part of the salah. And it's not difficult. I mean, he just needs to know how to pray in a proper way. But mixing the opinions or picking and choosing is not really a recommended thing. Yes.
So clarifying your answer is saying, like, because last time you said we don't have to, like, in Muslim, we don't have to learn any method if we just, and we're not going to be asked about.
Yeah.
So, but we could fall into the trouble of combining. It's just like between 4.
Yeah, that's what I said.
We have to follow. So we have to. Each one of us has to learn at least one to go by.
No, I said you do not have to follow in terms of attributing yourself to a madhab. I said you have to make sure you do it right. Do it right by, I have a teacher tell me pray like this. I'm praying like him. That's it. If I trust his authority, and that's it. This way turned out to be Shafi'i, Hanafi, it doesn't matter.
So I can trust Sheikh Yusuf. Show me how to pray and then I don't have to go any further.
Yes,
Right?
if you trust him.
See, like if I learn from my parents, but I don't know.
What?
Like if I learn how to pray from my parents, and that's what I've been doing.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they followed any of them. I mean, might have or any part of like.
Again, a lot of people follow a lot of things in fiqh and they don't know what is the madhab, which is okay. It's not about the label. It's not about the name. If you have doubt, you need to investigate and study. Yeah. And you need for every Muslim nowadays. This is my advice. For every Muslim, when he reaches the puberty and he's now responsible, even if his family has actually raised him in a good way and they taught him, he needs just to go over these things again. It's not like just the little things. It's not really there. Like tahara and salah is not a big deal. He needs to go, especially the things that he does every single day, which is tahara and salah, the main thing. He needs to go over them again, reading, studying within a halaqah. He has to do this, I think. Just to clarify. He will find a couple points here and there that he had some misconceptions about them or misunderstandings, which is completely fine. He would fix them and that's it. You had a question?
No, you were just saying you don't recommend that book, man. I read the book and I loved it because because the way, I don't want to take long, but just the way the book, I found it, like you're saying that, for example, he says in the book that you can put your hand like 3 different positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you choose one of those positions, and let's say that in that situation, then the way how you put your hands in ruku' and different steps, so you're saying you can't pick and choose at every stage how to put your hand. But I know
You can't pick and choose?
You were saying that if you follow, you don't recommend that book book based on the fact that this book will tell you a specific, different, what the madhab said in each location, how you can put your hands, how to set.
I don't relate this example to the book, by the way, but okay, go on.
Okay, but you're saying that you can't pick and choose. You have to follow a certain method of prayer. How the Hanafi prayed, how this prayed, how this prayed, how this prayed. Even though the Dalil, you have a hadith that says you can put your hand like this, like this, like that. You have a hadith that says you can put how to make sujood like different. Just a general example.
Okay.
But you wouldn't be wrong if, for example, in ruku' or in standing you put your hands like this, and in between ruku' you put your hands like that. Even though that's from one madhab, that's from one madhab.
Yeah, because those are sunnah.
Yes.
Yeah, sunnah are okay, but that's not my point on this book.
No, but you said you can't collect from all four madhabs.
In the conditions and the pillars of the ibadah. In the sunnah, it's much easier, by the way. The way you say the dua, the way you put your hand, the way you raise your hand. These things are much easier because they're not going to invalidate the salah according to all the madhab. I'm talking about the pillars of the salah. But that's not the point on the book. The point in the book is that there is no clear methodology in the book. Every opinion, he gives his own personal opinion on every single issue by itself. So there is no one school he's following. He said, this issue, that's my opinion. This issue is my opinion. This issue, and this is a problem with a lot of modern books on fiqh.
But he was a scholar.
Yeah, but he was not a mujtahid. So he cannot offer this.
Some people say
And that-
he wasn't.
Okay, that's different. That's a different conversation. But that's number one. That's my claim.
Yeah,
He was not a mujtahid. And number two, that's one of the main sources of confusion. These, not just his book. A lot of modern books on fiqh, it's a main source of confusion because the author gives his own personal opinion, which I highly respect. But that doesn't have to be the truth. And that leads to a lot of confusion because, okay, you should pray this way, you should make wudu this way. This is my opinion on this non-ifar wudu. This random opinions with no one coherent methodology. That's not fiqh. That's personal opinions. And I don't want to cause a lot of troubles, but I have a big problem with fiqh sunnah too. Okay, just because this book is in every household, they have a copy of this book, basically. This book is one of the main sources of confusion. Sheikh Sayyid was a big scholar, rahimahullah. I have no problem with the scholars, but that's a huge source of confusion. Why? Because he gives his own personal opinions, but just people take it for granted. And he doesn't have a certain clear, he didn't even say in the introduction that we have a certain methodology, that okay, this is the way I'm gonna actually tell you the rules and the rulings of fiqh. I'm telling you, okay, that's my opinion, which is completely right, or completely fine. That's my opinion of wudu, that's my opinion of salah, that's my opinion of so and so. That's not a madhab. That's not a clear usul way of giving fatwas. Just he's given, or given teaching fiqh, he's just given his personal opinions and things. So does this stand for complete, comprehensive understanding of the fiqh? No, it doesn't. So that's not enough source by itself to understand the religion. That's you can't put it. I know. I give this another example too. Yeah. I said even that book. Both. I'm talking about both. I'm talking about both books because both are so common. A lot of people read these books. So I'm not saying okay, read the book, but they gotta cause a lot of confusion. So you need to read other books too to understand what those scholars are saying. And you need to understand difference between personal preference or opinion and between like a full methodology of understanding. That's why, and I can claim that following the madhab is one of the biggest factors of protection for our communities. And one of the biggest factors of protection for the identity for Muslims who live in here is the madhab. Because those are the most authentic, reliable sources of religion. If you just put them aside and we ignore them and we try to depend on our own like reasoning, thinking and personal ijtihad without being qualified for this ijtihad. I'm going to talk more about ijtihad next time, inshallah. This will cause a lot of confusions, will cause a lot of differences, will cause a lot of fights.